major, you produce all the changes below the lower eyelid that occur because of action unit 6, orbicularis oculi pars lateralis. So the only place you can look to know is the eye cover fold. Because remember, it's an orbital muscle, and it slightly lowers the eye cover fold. Now, it raises a very interesting theoretical question, which is, why isn't this a clear-cut signal? It isn't. It's very hard to see. You can measure it with facts. You can teach people to do better than chance at real time, but they're not going to get it every time. And all you can do if you want to make up stories about our ancestral environment is say, there must not have been any benefit to our survival to be able to tell, did you really like my joke? Or are you really feeling okay, or are you just wanting me to think you feel okay? You're surely not going to be able to do it most of the time, but you can from real life. But you can do it with facts measurement. Now, the other thing that Duchenne didn't realize he had pointed out to us, which is that one of the clues that you can use across emotions to discern whether or not the expression is a spontaneous one or a false, deliberate, voluntarily produced one, is whether one of the movements that's very hard to do voluntarily is absent. So the clue for anger is the absence of AU23, because most people can't do it.
So it's this it's the lip.
It's a tightening of the red margins of the lip. If it isn't there, that's deliberately produced anger. That's a wonderful principle to use across emotions.
Yeah.
And every time we've tested it in our deception research, it works.
Oh, interesting, yeah.
So Duchenne didn't know that his observation about the enjoyment smile had applicability, but I wouldn't have thought of that if it wasn't for his suggestion.
So if 100 years from now that's referred to as the Ekman tight lip?
It should be the Ekman principle. It does not include the Ekman principle, therefore it's not genuine.
Someone will do that, let's hope. Now, the other person you mentioned, and that's Silvan Tomkins, who wrote this, I guess it was 71. He wrote the first volume of the
61.
61. Oh, God, yeah.
Actually,
So that's really early on.
It's either 61 or 62. There were 2 volumes that came out.
Yeah, 62, 63, right, yeah. And affect, imagery, and consciousness, yeah. And in this picture, this is towards the end of his life, isn't it?
Well, it's maybe 15 years before the end of his life. Silvan is probably about 65 there.
Is this his house?
No. Yes, it is. No, it isn't. It's in the lab, an early version of the lab, because there's another picture taken at the same time that has Wallace Friesen in it as well. And while I visited Silvan, we had a very close, he became for a while my good father.
The father you never had?
Yes, and then he eventually ended up my bad father.
The father you did have.
The father I did have. What a disappointment. But at this point, he was being strictly good father, and we met together in person every month and talked every week. And I would not have tried to deal with the face without his help. And he already knew so much, and he did these amazing things of being able to go up to a face on film or still and tell me what emotion it was and show me exactly where he was getting it. I thought, if Silvan can do that, then I have to create a tool to replace him so everyone can do that. So it was the inspiration first for the facial affect scoring technique, and then for facts.
And was he intuitive, or was he using?
Oh, no, he knew exactly. He would point to which wrinkle, which bulge he was using. Now, Silvan learned all of this, he said, watching his infant grow up, because his wife at that time, who was a starlet, wasn't much interested in child rearing, and Silvan sat around all the time watching the facial expressions of his son. We needed a way to measure the face. And we wanted to not just do judgment studies where we could show that people said the same thing, when they looked at people either from different cultures or the same culture, that is, the same expression was interpreted as the same emotion regardless of culture. We had a lot of evidence, both from the literate and then the pre-literate, visually isolated cultures, but we wanted to show that the behavior itself was the same. You have to be able to measure the face. There wasn't anything available. So with Silvan's participation, we built the facial affect scoring technique, and what we did was to take all the things that were in the photographs for emotion at that point, where we had gotten high agreement across cultures, and put them in the scoring technique so that the way in which you measured a new expression is matching it to one of the things in it. Well,
so I have a picture from the original article.
Yes.
And
so there are, on the right side, are examples of some of the mouths, not all of them, that were in the facial action scoring technique.
Sorry, it's facial affect scoring technique.
That's right, it should be facial affect scoring technique. Affect was the word that Silvan preferred to emotion because of his psychoanalytic background. And I love the fact that the acronym was FAST because it was slow.
Slow, yeah.
Very slow to use, not as slow as FACTS. And then there's an example of one of the eyebrow movements and of two of the eye movements. So it was a matching to exemplar. Yeah. The only problem is it doesn't have all the exemplars, but I didn't know that. I relied on Silvan. He didn't know that either. So, but it worked well enough to, in the study comparing the facial behavior of Japanese and American subjects, the display rule study, when they were alone and when they were together, we used FAST.
Oh, you didn't? You didn't use FACTS because FACTS didn't exist yet. Yeah, right.
And it produced really nice results, even though we were missing some facial behavior without knowing it. So we published it. And I went to an anthropology meeting, I can't remember where it was, and in a bar after the meetings, I was having a drink with this fellow who had come up and talked to me after I gave my paper. His name was Wade Seaford, and he was at a Southern university, very interested in facial expression. And he said, I looked at FAST, and he said, why isn't triangularis in it? I said, what do you mean? So he made the movement, which is, that's now AU15. I was crushed, because it wasn't in it.
Did you have a sad face in FAST?
Well, we had lip corners down produced by AU17. Yeah. Well, this actually turns out that this has a different meaning than that. You can't leave this out. If I'd left that out, God knows what else. So I came back and I told Wally, we're going to have to get involved in the anatomy. It's the only way we're going to find out. And he was not at all happy, even less happy than I was. I told Silvan, and he said, you'll never succeed. It's too complicated. It'll be the end of your career. He was almost right. It almost ruined my career, but he was fundamentally wrong. And it was, I didn't realize how long it would take. But I also knew, because at that point I was getting very involved in deception research, that if I was going to distinguish real or genuine from false expressions, I needed a finer grained tool than FAST. So that was a separate motivation. But I didn't realize what a nightmare it would be because there was nothing, virtually nothing to build on. But Wade Seaford deserves a lot of credit. It was a deep humiliation. Yeah. Since I thought I had something that worked and I had published it, he could just right there and then show me something that I couldn't deal with.
That's great. You know, I read a recent interchange between the two of you, and you were both extremely complimentary about that moment and what came of it. And it's one of those cases where science is collaborative and not antagonistic. Yeah. It's very, very reassuring. Yeah. And all these years later, a lot of good things came out of that drink in a bar. Another person, Robin Fox, is a character in this, and Lionel Tiger, the famous Fox and Tiger show.
When I met them, and I only met them once, they looked much younger, as did I. It was about 1975 or 76. I had, without their permission, taken the one 5-year grant. I had been supported on grants without interruption from the clinical branch of NIMH from 1963, when my fellowship ended, till this was now 76. And they'd given me, for the first time, 5 years, which means you have 4 years you can work before you have to write your renewal.
I didn't know they had 5-year grants in those
They
days.
did.
Yeah.
I got it only once, never again. And they had also said to me, Paul, you've stopped studying depression. You say you're studying depression. Come on. And I said to them, look, to really get at the information, I need a tool to measure the face. We don't have it. I'm going to spend this time developing it. Now, that's not what I wrote in the grant proposal, but I did tell the program person, whose face I can see, but his name is missing me. He was an Iranian, I believe, long-time career in IMH staff. Very sweet man. His name will come to me, because I dedicated my last book to all the people at NIMH, and his name is in there.
Remember, David Pearl was one of those people who you were.
Yes, this was
another person from that era.
From that era. He said, well, one thing we have to tell you, if the tool isn't finished by the time the 5 years are over, don't reapply. So that's all Wally and I did. And we spent, that's all, literally. We stopped every other kind of research and just worked on this. And 4 years had gone by, and we weren't there yet. We were close, but I hadn't yet gotten to the point where I could do a reliability check. And I had about 4 or 5 more months before the manual would be done. And then I knew it was going to take at least a year to see whether I could make this self-instructional so that others could learn and we could show that it was reliable. You didn't have to come to the master to learn it. Anyone could learn it. So I was in some despair, and I know what to do. And I get a phone call. Is this Paul Ekman? Yes. This is Lionel Tiger. I'm in town. We're in downtown San Francisco. Robin Fox and I. The two of us run the Guggenheim Foundation. Not the big one, the small one. And what we do is we give out grants to people whose work we like. We like your work. So could you use any money at this point? If you could, why don't you come on downtown and have a drink with us and tell us what it's about, and we can give you some money. I said, who is this really?
It's Ashton Kutcher, and you've been punked.
Fox and Tiger? Come on, you're pulling my leg. You expect me to believe, and you're going to give me money? Come on, who is it really? But he convinced me it was him. I went downtown and told them where I was on fax, and they gave me the money to finish it. And so it's another one of these incredible serendipities that if they had not given me the money to finish it, I think I might have someday been able to find the money to finish it. I don't know. Nobody, it was a long shot that you could do it. Even somebody like Silvan, as knowledgeable as he was about the face, thought we would fail. I knew we already had it.
Yeah.
We just needed the time to finish it, and then to make it self-instructional, so that people wouldn't be. There are standard techniques in psychology to this day that in order to learn it, you have to go, and like Mary Main's thing, and study with the master. And then but I wanted facts to be independent of us, so anyone could learn it. And most of the people who have learned it, I've never taught facts to anyone.
No, because I spent a year in your lab, and I remember I was relegated to the second floor of the annex of the lab to learn it on my own.
Right.
And I had to do that before you would talk to me.
Right.
So,
and it's the language. You want to speak the language, you got to learn it, because we all talk in numbers.
By the way, would you like to mention who has the highest recorded final test score in the history of facts?
It must be you, Robert, if you're asking. But I can also tell you that I think the highest score, I think she we would have to say that you are the highest scoring psychologist. But look at the look on your face. A young college undergraduate learned it in 50 hours and got a better score than you.
Well, yeah, but these youngsters, they don't have the appreciation.
They have young brains.
Yeah, all right.
Well, the difference is that when even a graduate student, let alone a professor, learns it, they argue with everything they read. So it takes them a lot longer to learn it. She didn't argue with anything. She just learned it.
Took me 3 months. Yeah.
So you can learn it in 50 hours. Let me speak to any scientist who is now looking at this. If you intend to use facts in your research, you better learn it, not just rely on your research assistant or graduate students or postdocs, because you won't know what you've got unless you learn it.
That's really important. Maybe let's take a second and just talk about that the self-teaching system. So there were a number of parts. My favorite part, and this is only part of my favorite part because the other parts in the Smithsonian was this plastic. I remember it. I spent hours and hours with it. Yellow. I remember it had a pink handle. I don't know. You'd crank it. You'd load up this cartridge, and you would see these frame-by-frame films. You could go forward and backwards. Very good shots. Very high resolution of the face, making the action units. So that was one part.
Yes, it was very important, we thought, to exemplify each action, not just with still photographs we did, but with motion, so you could see it go on and off the face. It's very hard to do fact scoring off of stills, much easier when you can see the actual movement occur. Now the problem was, at that time, the only slow motion projectors cost about $2,800. We had 2 of them, and they weren't terribly reliable. And then there was this system, I forget the name of it, that was used primarily for golf lessons, and that you could get in it. And I convinced the people who manufactured this and sold it in sporting goods stores to make this for us. And this gave you everything that the $2,800 projector gave.
It was
gave
wonderful.
You slow motion, variable slow motion.
Yeah, click.
A clicker, you could still frame it. Spectacular device. And
I know somewhere in my lab I still have the cranker part. This is the one from my lab, and we are now looking for it.
Oh, very good, Robert.
Yeah.
When you get it, at least give me a digital of it.
Put it on eBay and make a ton of money. And then there was the instructor's manual, or the investigator's guide, and you have the original one.
Well, this is the actual manual. I don't have the investigator's guide. I didn't bring it. I have that at home. But this is the original manual itself, and what people got. That was another piece of it.
I don't know if this is going to work or not, but this is this huge Talmudic compendium of what the face does. And you know, this was the undoing of many an erstwhile facts learner. And then a lovely set of still photos.
Yes.
They
came just in a stack. To preserve them, I have them here, and they were primarily photographs of me. There are a few of Wally where he could do things, and he didn't have the voluntary control that I did. I started out pretty good voluntary control. My mother used to say to me when I was a kid, "Stop making all those faces, one of them will freeze." And she didn't live long enough to see you could make a living of being able to make all those faces. But
and that you'd collaborate with someone whose last name was Friesen.
That's right. So I did fulfill her prophecy. So you would get these as a stack, and often you needed to rearrange them. So you had the photographs, or the investigator's guide, and the manual, and the cartridges.
Let's not forget
And
that's not all. For $9.95 in 3 payments, you got the little cranker too.
So Consulting Psychologist Press sold it. Didn't make much money because Facts never sold more than 300 to 400 copies a year, and they set the price at a couple of $100, and then they eventually gave up because it just wasn't worth it to keep something with such a low sales. But now there's a CD version that.
Is that it? I was looking online to
Yeah,
see.
that's it.
That's what the CD looks like.
Right. And it includes some updates. Joe Hager did the majority of them. Erica and I verified all of them. And so it's more up to date. Nobody should use the old manual. It's also much easier to use because everything is there, and you can go from one place to another much more easily. There are still a few changes, like the one I mentioned earlier about the upper part of the pecularis oculi that aren't in there.
When we've mentioned him a number of times already, and when one thinks about facts, one thinks about your long-term collaborator, and I think of him as your co-conspirator in facial measurement, Wally Friesen. And Wally was originally going to be with us today. He's living in Kentucky now, and he, because of illness, wasn't able to join us. So that was really too bad, because in a way, our original plan was to have this discussion amongst the three of us. But I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how you met Wally and the special skills he brought to the development of facts, and how you look back on this collaboration.
I met Wally when I was drafted into the Army. So was he. I was drafted when I got my PhD in '58, and he was drafted when he dropped out of graduate school at the University of Kansas. And I was a first lieutenant, and he was a PFC, and we were both assigned to the mental health clinic at Fort Dix, New Jersey, where every 8 weeks another 40,000 men got trained. And I got my first grant while I was there from the Surgeon General's office, and Wally was very interested in research. I had a staff of 12 either BAs or partial MAs in psychology, enlisted men. We did a lot of research, and Wally was my project coordinator. He oversaw all of the research, and we were not allowed to, he was never allowed, if anyone heard him call me by my first name, we could both be court-martialed. So it was a very tough system. Yeah. But we saw each other off post, and we became friendly. And I encouraged him. I got out of the Army about 4 months before he did. I only had a 2-year. At that time, if you got drafted, it was just for 2 years. If you're enlisted, it was for 4. And I was coming back to San Francisco,